She's been dead 3 hours now. Sitting with my laptop, huddled in a corner of my flat, I still can't believe I'm writing this. It doesn't seem real. None of it seems real. A week ago we were on a holiday together, and now I have to get this down. That's the main thing. I need to get it down, or no one will believe me. Shit, I'm not sure even I believe me. Although I can still see it when I shut my eyes, a part of my brain is already working to convince the rest of me it was just a dream. Just some awful, half-delirious nightmare brought on by the stress of my girlfriend's illness. It isn't, though. I know it isn't. And if I don't make a record of this now, I think something in my head is going to snap. Poppy started finding the hairs the day after we got back. We'd been on holiday to Myanmar. Our first big trip together. Poppy and I have been going out 3 years, and we finally moved in together last summer. We've been planning that trip ever since. Looking back now, it feels like the holiday happened to someone else. To some other couple. We visited the temples of Bagan, saw the sights in Yangon, sunbathed beside in a lake. Even went skinny dipping after a few cocktails, when the rest of the hotel was dark and quiet in the early hours. Trekking, too. That was my favorite thing. We went on a handful of group hikes through the villages and the countryside, following a guide through fields of chili and ginger. We slept under the stars. I guess holidays like that can sometimes cause problems in a relationship after 2 solid, occasionally exhausting weeks together. I imagine cracks start to show with some couples, but it wasn't like that for me and Poppy. The whole trip brought us closer together. It was the happiest I've been in years. But the day after we got back, things changed. That was when Poppy began finding the hairs. They were in her mouth when she woke up. I still remember the first morning she told me. It was the day we were both due back at work, and I found her standing in our bathroom by the sink, frozen in front of the mirror. She was still in her pajamas, and she didn't glance up when I came in. "Aren't you getting dressed?" I asked. "We're going to miss the train if we don't leave in 10, sweetheart." Poppy blinked. Her eyes found mine in the mirror. She had a slight frown on her face, and I thought at first she hadn't heard me. Then she held out her left hand with the palm facing up. "So weird," she muttered. 3 white hairs lay across it. They were short, maybe an inch long, slightly crinkled. My parents have a white Jack Russell cross, and they reminded me a bit of the hairs she sometimes left on my coat when I went to visit. "What's that? Are you molting?" I'd meant it as a joke, but Poppy didn't laugh. Her eyes flicked from mine to the hairs in her hand, then back to mine again. She pulled a face. "This is going to sound super gross, but well, I don't even get how it happened. I found them in my mouth. I could feel something tickling me when I woke up. So fucking gross. It was like that feeling when you get a hair in a mouthful of food." She grimaced. "Where do you think they came from?" I frowned down at the hairs in her hand, then shrugged. Glanced at my watch. "I don't know. Probably off that light grey jumper of yours or something. Who knows? We'd better make a move, anyway." Poppy leaned forward and turned on the tap. Held her left hand under it and watched the hairs wash off her skin and run down the plug hole. Her next words were half mumbled, and I almost missed them beneath the sound of the water. "That jumper's shoved in a cupboard somewhere. I haven't worn it in a year. As I write this now, a big part of me hates myself. I hate myself for not taking it more seriously. The whole thing happened fast once it started, it's true, and I don't even know if I'd have been able to stop it anyway. But I could have tried. I could have rushed her to the doctor early on. If not after that first morning, then at least after she began showing other symptoms. The next day it was stomach aches. Poppy didn't mention hairs to me again, not that morning, at least, but when I went to wake her for work she told me she wasn't going in. She had sharp pains in her belly, she said. Had been getting them all night. Barely slept. I kissed her forehead and told her to get plenty of rest. Said it was probably the chicken she'd eaten last night, or one of those 24-hour bugs. Told her to get some sleep and it would get better. It didn't get better. When I returned home from work 9 hours later, eyes stinging and tired, Poppy was still in bed. She moaned a half greeting when I came into the room, but didn't open her eyes. I woke the next day to see Poppy sat up in bed beside me. Her dark hair was stuck to her forehead in sweaty clumps. Her eyes were half lidded with sleep. "I don't fucking get this." Her voice sounded weak and gravelly. She stared down at her hands, which were cupped in front of her, her forehead creased in a frown. More of those fucking hairs. The same white ones again. She turned to me as I sat up in bed, and for the first time I saw something more than confusion on her face. Something approaching fear. I started to mumble some sleepy response, but she cut me off. "I had them yesterday too, Chris. I remember half waking when your alarm went off, and feeling them there. 3 small hairs on my tongue, and one between my back teeth." She shuddered. "It doesn't fucking make sense. Before I had a chance to say anything, she groaned and screwed her eyes shut, leaned forward with her arms clutched around her belly. I put my hand on her arm and waited for the pain to pass. After a few seconds had gone by, she straightened again and turned to look at me. No better. The question seemed stupid, obvious, but it was all I could think to say. Poppy frowned. I felt like I slept a bit better last night, but when I woke up this morning the pain was back. It comes in waves, but it's still there. Before I left for work we agreed that she'd book a doctor's appointment. Later, sat at my desk as the afternoon stretched on and the minutes dragged, I did some googling. Symptoms. The NHS website. Went. None of it helped. There were too many possibilities, ranging from mild stomach bugs to things I didn't even want to consider. And when I added in the white hairs, nothing came up at all. The thing at the back of my mind, the thing I didn't want to pay too much attention to, even though I knew I couldn't ignore it, was the holiday. Our trip to Myanmar. Because you heard stories, didn't you? Travelers who came back home with weird tropical illnesses. People who ignored a tiny bite or a sting, only for it to turn into something worse. I'd even had a similar conversation with the guide on one of our treks. Kim, his name had been. We got talking one night over a cigarette, which we passed back and forth outside the home of the villagers who were putting our group up for the night. The conversation had started with his job, then moved on to tourism in the area. To some of the stupid things he'd seen people do. Some people, they do not have any sense of respect, Kim had said. I can still remember the way the tip of his cigarette glowed in the night. The trail of smoke drifting up from his silhouette. They do not understand that they are guests in someone else's home, or that the area they are in can be dangerous. They want to pet stray dogs. They want to take photos of snakes. He turned to me and grinned, teeth shining in the dark. I actually had one woman who did that. We saw a viper in the path, very dangerous, and she wanted me to take a picture of her with a snake in it. I laughed quietly. You're serious? Kim nodded. We always get these people. All the time, my friends are seeing this. They take stupid risks. Go up to wild animals. Swim in lakes they shouldn't swim in. Walk in places they shouldn't walk. My mind suddenly flashed back to mine and Poppy's skinny dipping session at the hotel in Inle, and a pang of guilt went through me. I didn't say anything. All the time, and they don't know the dangers, Kim continued. Hidden dangers. You can get bitten by something, maybe a wild dog. Rabies. Poisonous snakes. Spiders that lay eggs in a cut. Parasites in the water. My country, it needs the tourism, but it is, how do you say in England? Like a sword with two edges. Good and bad. He paused and took another drag on a cigarette, before handing it back to me. Some people, they don't respect the land. They don't understand that there are old places here, old things that have been here long before them, and should not be disturbed. Poppy was worse when I got home that day. Quite a lot worse. Barely spoke, wouldn't eat the soup I made her. She had this smell on her breath when I bent to kiss her that was sort of spoiled. Like meat that's been left out on the side for too long. The only thing I got out of her was that she'd booked a doctor's appointment for the following afternoon, and I have to admit that made me feel a bit better at the time. When I eventually joined her in bed a few hours later, she was fast asleep. Something woke me in the night. A noise. Sort of a half-heard rustling that blended with the dream I was having. I struggled up from sleep like a swimmer dragging themselves to the surface of the water. The room was dark, and at first I couldn't get my bearings. I could still hear the scrabbling noise I'd heard in my dream, and it took my mind a moment to realize I was awake. Scritch-scratch, scritch-scratch. A soft rustling. It sounded close. One of the old houses I lived in as a student once had a rat infestation, and that was the first place my mind went. Little scurrying feet in the walls, maybe, or under the floor. That was wrong, though, and I knew it was wrong. The noise was soft, but it wasn't behind the walls. It was closer than that. I turned onto my back, the bed creaking beneath my body. The noise stopped. I stared into the darkness, ears pricked, but I couldn't hear anything. The room was silent. Then I saw a hint of movement from the corner of my eye. I tilted my face in Poppy's direction, and felt my breath catch in my throat. Her head was the wrong shape. Staring at her silhouette, that was the first thought to shoot across my mind. She looked wrong. I could only make out her outline in the room's thick darkness, but the shape of her head was lumpy. Like an extra jut of bone was sprouting from the place her mouth should be. I closed my eyes, hard, trying to force the sleep out of them, and two things happened at once. Poppy's dark shape shifted in the bed, and a whining noise, a soft, high-pitched keening issued from her side of the bed. Then it broke off into a coughing fit as she rolled onto her side. Poppy sputtered, pulling in little hitching half-breaths, and coughed some more. I held my breath. I suddenly had the horrible idea that she might be choking in her sleep, her throat clogged with a mixture of phlegm and those tiny white hairs she kept pulling from her mouth. But after a few more seconds, the coughing petered out. I lay frozen in the bed, fully awake now, listening, straining my ears for those soft rustling sounds. But the only noise I could hear was Poppy's breathing. That was last night. It feels like it happened years ago, but there it is. Less than 24 hours. Less than one full day for my life to be ripped apart. I need to write this next bit fast, now. I have to get it down. If I think too much about it, or hesitate, I know I'll lose my nerve. I left for work as usual this morning. Just that sentence alone makes me feel sick with guilt, but it's true. I didn't ring the hospital, or drive Poppy to E, like I now know I should have done. I just got dressed and walked out the door like it was another day. I could tell you it was Poppy's doctor's appointment, which I knew was coming up, or the fact she was fast asleep when I kissed her goodbye, but neither of those things make me feel better. I think a big part of me knew something was wrong, even then seriously wrong, but the rest of me didn't want to admit it. The feeling didn't go away, though. As the hours ticked by at work and I didn't hear anything from Poppy, it grew. I told myself she'd be sleeping, and then I told myself she'd be busy at her appointment, but it didn't help. By the time 5 o'clock hit and I finally left the office, I was practically running. I knew something was wrong as soon as I got to our front door. Before then, actually, I could hear Poppy's ragged coughs echoing down the hall as I reached the corridor outside our flat. They were worse than they'd been the night before, those coughs. Much worse. I didn't know if it was the acoustics of the hall distorting them, but to me they barely sounded human. I fumbled my key into the lock and burst through the front door, staggered along the hall to the source of the sound, the bathroom. Poppy was on her knees in front of the toilet, hands clutching the porcelain. Her hair hung around her face in sweaty black curtains, and she coughed over and over again. Her whole body shook with the force of them. "Sweetheart, she turned to me, half turned towards the sound of my voice. And as soon as I got a glimpse of her face, my words died on my tongue. Poppy's skin was dark red. The tendons on her neck stood out like ropes. Strands of hair stuck to her forehead, framing and half obscuring her bloodshot eyes. I could see the fear in those eyes, something fast approaching terror. Poppy opened her mouth, and I stared on in horror as a runnel of blood spilled from the corner of it. A low moan issued from deep in her throat, a sound filled with pain and panic. I had my hand in my pocket, struggling to free my smartphone, when she collapsed. Her hand slipped from the toilet and she crashed sideways onto the tiles. Poppy's whole body jerked and shook. Her face was turned towards me, mouth open. A strangled gurgling issued from it. I was unlocking my phone, fingers slipping across the screen, when I saw something in the dark cave of her throat. There was a white shape in there. It stood out in the blackness of her mouth. Some blockage. My first thought was that it looked like a dull knob of bone, maybe food lodged against her windpipe. Then it moved. It wasn't Poppy's shaking that caused it to shift. The thing in her throat moved on its own. I could see it writhing and twisting in there. The phone slipped from my hands. I dropped down onto my knees beside Poppy, already cupping her face in one hand. By this point her skin had changed to an angry shade of purple, and I could no longer hear her breathing. I guess I had the idea that I was going to reach down her throat and pull whatever it was out of there. Clear her airwaves. But as I twisted her face towards mine so I could look into her mouth, I saw that I wouldn't need to, because the thing was coming out on its own. I will never, ever get the image of what I saw in Poppy's mouth out of my mind. Not ever. I can see it now, clearly, when I shut my eyes in nightmare reel of images that are going to play and play and play, like a horror film stuck on loop. Back before we discovered we had a rat infestation at university, we used to keep our bin bags outside, in a pile by the back door. None of us were very good at remembering the day the rubbish was meant to go out, and sometimes those bags were left to stack up for weeks. I remember one day, going outside with a fresh bag to dump, that I heard rustling in the black pile. A soft scrabbling sound. I thought it was just the wind at first, but when I went to drop the bag in my hands I saw a hole that had been ripped in one of the older sacks. A jagged mouth in the bin liner. As I stared at that hole, I have a clear memory of seeing the plump head of a rat nosing its way out. That was the memory that flew through my mind as I stared into Poppy's mouth. That fat brown rat, worming its way out of the bag. Only what I saw in the bathroom, what I saw dragging its way from the wet darkness of Poppy's throat was far, far worse. It was about the same size as a rat, but that's where the similarities ended. Its fur was white, for one thing. A dirty off-white, with streaks of blood and half-digested food clinging to the bristles. As it propelled itself forward, wriggling its body over Poppy's tongue, I saw that it didn't have feet. The thing had legs, but they were long and thin, closer to the legs of a spider than a rodent. Lots of legs. They writhed and scrabbled for purchase in Poppy's mouth. All of it was terrible, but it wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was the creature's face. It was sort of crumpled in a brown pulp of flesh that looked like a tumor in that sea of white hair. A tumor with 3 unblinking, yellow eyes. I fell backwards, away from Poppy. Something in my mind felt like it was slipping, and all rational thought of clearing Poppy's airways or calling an ambulance had temporarily left me. All I could do was sit on the cold tiles, staring. The creature whined. It was a high-pitched, mewling sound that made the skin of my neck itch. The thing's nest of black legs scrabbled for purchase on Poppy's lower lip, finally dragging its rodent-like body free of her mouth. I used my hands to scrabble backwards as the thing fell to the tiles. Have you ever seen a cockroach move? They don't look like they should be fast, but they are. The white creature crouched in front of Poppy's unmoving form moved like that. One moment it was still, the next it was scuttling towards me. But the fear at seeing it come at me hardly even had a chance to register before it had scampered straight by, legs clicking against the tiles as it fled the bathroom. I caught a glimpse of it scurrying across our bedroom, scaling the curtains in a white-black blur, and then it was gone. Through the half-open window and into the night. I don't remember calling the ambulance. I must have done it, though, because at some point I remember a paramedic taking my arm. I was sat with Poppy at the time, talking to her while I stroked her hair. I didn't hear them come in. I think I already knew she was dead by then. She hadn't moved in a long time, and her skin felt cold. I don't remember much of what happened next, but I remember one of the paramedics leading me into our lounge and sitting me on the sofa, talking to me. I guess I talked back, but I can't remember what I said. The only thing I do remember was insisting that I wasn't going to come with them when they left. I said I'd follow on after, even though I didn't even know where they were going. I might have screamed it at him. For a long time after they'd gone, before I started writing all this, I just sat staring into space. Thinking about what I should have done and didn't do. Thinking about that thing growing in Poppy's stomach. Thinking about the conversation I had with Kin, what seems like a lifetime ago, when he told me about the old things of this world. Things that shouldn't be disturbed. I need to go soon. I need to make calls, tell people about Poppy, follow the paramedics. I'm not sure I can, though. That's the thing. I'm not sure I can leave this flat. A big part of me wants to walk out the door and never come back here again, but another part, quite a large part, actually keeps thinking about the darkness outside the window. That same darkness the white thing disappeared into. The white, scuttling creature that even now must be out there somewhere, maybe lurking in the sewers or squeezed into some dark crack in a wall.